Good evening and welcome to Historic Miamisburg, the Bicentennial Edition. I'm your host, John Warrington, and I'm a member of the Miamisburg Historical Society. Mound Laboratory played a significant role in the growth and development of the city of Miamisburg for more than 50 years. This is the first installment of what is hoped to be several shows highlighting the research and products produced there from 1949 through 2008. I'm pleased to introduce my guests from the Mounds Science and Energy Museum, Mr. Paul Lamburger, who is the Vice President, and Mr. Ken Phipps, who is on the Board of Trustees. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell our viewers a little bit about how the Mounds Science and Energy Museum was created and what kind of artifacts might a person see when they visit your museum.
Well, the effort to create a museum was started in 1998 when two former Mound employees, Don Sullinger and Japnel Braun, decided to ask employees who were still involved in the closure process and also those who had retired to collect as many unclassified artifacts as possible for use in a museum.
And what kind of artifacts do you have on display? What was a visitor going to see when they visit?
They're going to see examples of products. Most of those are explosive type products. Also, the heat sources that power all the spacecraft that are out in space, and a variety of examples of facilities in which work was conducted.
Mm-hmm. You know, the thing that struck me was how many actual displays and documents and pictures that you have that relate to the history of the mound. It's very interesting. It's sort of like a chronological going back in time as to see what was actually done at that facility. Very interesting. And how much time would it take for a person to see your museum?
It depends on how much time they have. Really, we can conduct a tour that gives you an overview in 30 minutes, mm-hmm. or spend a couple hours.
Yeah, I know when I visited there several times, I was watching you conduct tours, and it seemed like most of them were over an hour long because it takes, you have like 2 floors of exhibits there. So.
Right, and there's 4 major areas, programmatic areas, and those can be tailored to the interest of the person, mm-hmm. and how much time they've got.
Sure. Well, one thing our viewers really need to know is that Miamisburg Mound products are still in nuclear weapons, in instruments that were placed on the lunar surface, and are used to power space probes to Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, and beyond. We have a few pictures up here that just kind of show that these legacy of Mound Lab parts are still in existence. This picture is of which...
This is one of the space probes. Every NASA probe that's beyond Mars is powered by a Mound heat source, which is heat converted to electricity to power the instruments and to send the data back to Earth.
Mm-hmm. And this picture that they're seeing now is a sort of a cutaway of that power source,
right,
isn't it?
Right.
And this is not just on a few space probes, it's on quite a few, isn't it?
It's on everything that's past Mars. Mm-hmm. The first ones here are, this one's on the moon. Mm-hmm. Was taken there by the astronauts and left essentially to study moonquakes.
Oh, okay. So they have earthquakes on the moon too?
Yeah, earthquakes on the moon.
Mm-hmm. And this picture, I'm not sure which space probe that might be, but it still contains a product that was produced at the Mound Laboratories.
Not only produced, but invented.
Mm-hmm. And this picture is this the Cassini?
I think so.
And that one is currently outside the orbit of our universe, is that correct?
The Explorer, I think.
Explorer, okay.
Explorer is the one that's farthest from the Earth. It's
okay.
The second set.
So there's quite a legacy out in space and still in the United States of Mound products.
Right.
It's, so we've made our mark. Let's go back to the beginning of the Mound Laboratory, if we could. Can you tell us a little bit about the Manhattan Project and the Dayton operations before the end of World War II?
Well, the Manhattan Project was a top secret program approved by President Franklin Roosevelt during World War II to develop a super bomb, which came to be known as the atomic bomb. And information coming from European scientists indicated that the Germans were also working on this super bomb.
Okay, so we were trying to beat the Germans at their own game, basically, and had a little bit of heads up from scientists that had fled Germany prior to the outbreak of the war.
Exactly.
Okay. We have a map up here that shows the Manhattan engineering districts, and it just wasn't in a few cities. Actually, it was spread all over the United States, wasn't it?
Yes.
We have obviously the Dayton operation, but they also were in Los Alamos and in California at several locations, Berkeley, Washington State, and these were all working together to create the atomic weapon that they hoped to beat the Germans at.
That's right. The bomb was designed at Los Alamos.
Okay.
And then the production or basic research facilities were scattered around the country.
Okay.
Dayton had a certain assignment. Oak Ridge had another assignment, separation of isotopes, and research was conducted at Berkeley in California, part of the University of California.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Dayton operation, because that's what really got the Mound Laboratory to be part of this component. So what was the Dayton operation? What was their unique feature of contributing toward the Manhattan Project?
Well, the assignment was for Monsanto to conduct the research and development and separation of polonium, which was an element discovered by Madame Curie, and that element, in conjunction with some light metals like beryllium, was going to be used to make neutrons to initiate the chain reaction, and one of the critical parts of the bomb.
Okay. And we have a map of the Dayton operations. There was actually several facilities in the Dayton area that contributed to this. Here we see the map, and there are symbols there of the 4 locations. Can you explain what each one of those did? I notice we have the seminary, which was on West Dayton, and then we have a warehouse that was in basically downtown Dayton. Then we have the Monsanto lab south of town, and finally the Playhouse. And in talking to you, you mentioned that the Playhouse probably was the main factor of the Dayton operations. Is that correct? Or
That's correct, yes.
what kind of research was being done at the Playhouse? And we might mention that this is in the heart of Oakwood, which was away from any great population area, kind of an interesting place to hide nuclear research. So what kind of research was being done at that facility?
Well, it wasn't located there to hide anything. It was located there because that was a location that was available. Dr. Thomas, who headed the Monsanto efforts, was married to a Talbot, and Mr. Talbot, his wife's father, had built this so-called playhouse, which was not a child's playhouse, but a swimming pool and basketball courts and volleyball courts and stage and so on. And it was there in Oakwood, near their home.
Okay.
And he went and said, Dad, I got a problem. I'm working on this secret project for the war, and I very much could use the Playhouse.
And I think we have some pictures of the Playhouse that were on our screen, or maybe we can see them again. Again, it was in off of Runnymede Road in Oakwood.
Yeah, right.
So there it is. And it was kind of an interesting looking building, but you wouldn't think of it being as a government research facility.
No, no.
And what happened? Was that unit completely torn down after the war, or after it was finished?
It was used. It was used to do the experimentation on how to separate polonium from the ores, and then from irradiated bismuth, and it was separated and purified and then shipped to Los Alamos, where it was incorporated into the actual initiator.
Okay, so we were an important cog in that whole wheel. Without our work in the Dayton operations, nothing would have
It wouldn't have worked.
Okay. The person that played a key role in the Dayton operations was Charles Allen Thomas. A very interesting person from just our discussions leading up to this program. Ken, do you want to tell us a little bit about who this person was?
Yes, Charles Thomas was a brilliant chemist who had worked with Charles Kettering in Dayton, and then along with Carol Hockwalt, they had opened up their own chemical research laboratory on Nicholas Road in Dayton. And one of their clients was the Monsanto Chemical Company in St. Louis. And Monsanto liked the work of Thomas and Hockwalt so well that they bought their company and set them up as Monsanto's central research facility.
And that was located, when we saw the map of the Dayton operation, that was on Nicholas Road, the Monsanto Research Corporation.
Yes.
He was a renowned scientist and an interesting person. I think you mentioned to me he also had some role in the development of anti-knock gasoline with Boss Kettering.
Yes, that's correct.
So, you know, he must have been a genius to be able to work with Kettering also.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So, how was he recruited? How did the government find out about his abilities?
Really, I don't really know, but his reputation preceded him, and they invited him to a weapons test as sort of an interview, and he passed with flying colors. And they were so impressed that they asked him to be the deputy at Los Alamos.
Oh.
And he said no, his wife did not want to leave Dayton. And so they said, well, okay, will you take over the polonium chemistry job? And he said, sure.
Huh.
He also was responsible for the plutonium work that went on at Los Alamos. So he traveled a lot.
Yeah.
And he was at Los Alamos at least once a month, and with Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
And then he would come back to the Dayton area and see how things were going there.
Okay. Here we have a picture of him. This is probably during his work at Monsanto, that picture.
I would think that's about the
He
right.
lived, oddly enough, just right down the road here on Mad River Road. We have a picture of his house, and that house is pretty much the same as it was when he lived there.
Yes.
Anybody that drives by there, that is Mr. Thomas's house. Still there. So you mentioned that he was in charge of the purification of polonium. And I guess I have to ask this question: why is polonium so important in the process of making a nuclear weapon?
Well, the polonium was there to provide a source of neutrons, and neutrons were critical to the functioning of the bomb in a device called an initiator. An initiator incorporated polonium or some alpha emitter. And when an alpha particle bangs into a light element, and in this case we use beryllium, it makes neutrons, and the so-called alpha N reaction. So
it was, I think you also mentioned it had particular characteristics of having a pretty short half-life.
Had a short half-life, which meant that it decayed rapidly, and lots of alpha particles per unit time. So it was a good source.
And I guess most people may be unaware that a nuclear weapon or an atomic bomb just doesn't blow up on itself. This part that you mentioned, the initiator, is what actually starts the process of a nuclear explosion.
Right. It's sort of like a match on some tinder. The bomb will eventually go off with self-fissioning, but this gets it started and makes the reaction go faster, so you get more yield out of it before it blows itself apart.
And eventually Miamisburg was, is it my understanding, they were the sole producer of initiators
Yes.
for nuclear stockpiles.
Right.
So that without our component from Miamisburg, it wouldn't work.
Wouldn't work. That was true for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe 20.
Well, after the work concluded during World War II in 1945, construction soon began on the Miamisburg Mound Laboratory. When did the actual construction begin?
Well, excuse me, it began in 1947 and lasted through 1949. And it was located in Miamisburg,
Mm-hmm.
and not in Oak Ridge where the government wanted to put it, because the people who had worked at the Runnymede Playhouse, they'd established themselves there in the Dayton area, and they didn't want to move to Oak Ridge.
That makes sense.
So they started looking around for another location to build this new laboratory. Mm-hmm. And that's when they decided on Miamisburg.
And we have some pictures of the building, the main lab, T building, under construction here, and you can see it was a pretty elaborate process. The mound had some unique characteristics to it that made building there viable. And
yes,
yeah.
For building this underground building, they wanted a nice high place
Mm-hmm.
with a slope on the back of it.
Okay.
That way, instead of digging a hole and trying to build a building in a hole, they were able to go into the hillside
Mm-hmm.
and then build the building and cover it back over with earth.
Yeah,
and then through.
and visitors to your museum can see that side of the hill where that process or that entryway was made.
And a portion of the wall of the building is now
Mhm.
exposed for them to see.
And besides the physical characteristics of that area, then there were some other things that were available. We had a railroad line that
Mhm.
ran right next to the
Right.
facility.
We have our own siding at the lab.
And then we had, there was available water supply. I guess there was a requirement for having a sufficient water supply. And it had a topography that was kind of easy to defend, because this was a kind of a secret operation, and being on a hill like that, it was not easy to get to.
Mm-hmm.
You had to go through some channels to get up on the hill. So-
Another reason that the hill was so good was that we had stacks for ventilation of the buildings,
Okay.
and those stacks were quite high because they wanted ventilation, anything coming out of those stacks, to be very dilute before it ever hit the ground.
Yeah, and I remember as a child when I grew up there, that's prominently what you saw in the hill was water towers and smokestacks.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the most...
Which were not smokestacks.
Yeah, right. I thought they were smokestacks, but obviously they weren't. So, in your opinion, what impact did the Mound Lab have on the city of Miamisburg when it first went under construction? What were the immediate results of
The
it?
first thing was that the contractor, the construction contractor, realized that this was a big project. There'd be several hundred workers there, and there was no place for them to live. And so he actually built a trailer park down by the old movie theater on Old 25.
Which is still in existence today.
Right, and brought in maybe 200 house trailers for workers and their families to live in.
Hmm.
That was the first thing. Some of those people did take rooms in people's homes
Mhm.
in the town, and then all those workers had, a lot of them had kids, so there was an impact on the school system, sort of negative. A positive thing on the
Yeah.
general economy of the town.
Right.
A lot of people buying groceries and so on, so there was some positive and some negative impact. As time went on, then we got an income tax passed in this state, and eventually I think Mound workers contributed about 20% of the city budget from their income tax.
Mhm.
So that's another kind of impact, and a lot of support to the town.
Yeah, and in our discussions, the immediate increase in population, like you said, put an impact on the school district, but it kind of helped the school district in what way? I mean,
It did, because people that came to work at Mound, the technical people, all were college educated and pretty much wanted their kids to go to college too. So that boosted up, sort of raised the bar and supported raising the bar of the education in the schools. When I started to work there, you could teach in the city of Miamisburg. You didn't even have to have a teaching certificate.
Wow. They needed teachers bad, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah.
One thing the school system did was build some new buildings to handle the extra children who were going to be coming into town.
I remember I was in one of the buildings that just was constructed in 1955, Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And there were like 3 buildings, elementary school buildings, that went up within 1 year of each other in that town. So there was a definite increase in the population. And then the other side effects, obviously, if you have an increased population, you have the necessity for road work and infrastructure. I remember my mother used to work at the post office, and the post office did a big business with the Mound Labs because they were always moving mail and everything else through there.
Mound ended up with their own zip code.
That's right. You told me that.
4-2 was Miamisburg and 4-3 was the lab.
Okay. So they had a big operation, obviously,
Yeah.
for the mail and everything.
Right, 2,300 employees
Yeah.
eventually.
The impact of more people coming into Miamisburg resulted in my wife's family taking on a couple who's going to be there for quite some time to do their work, and they lived in their house.
Oh, and I bet that wasn't the only one. There's probably
there were
a
many
lot of
like
people that put people up from the Mound. I know my in-laws lived on Early Drive, and they bought a house that was actually built for some of the engineers. They were building a lot of brick structures at that time instead of frame structures for the people that worked at the Mound, and they just happened to get in there and buy a house right next to the Mound. So
Good.
it's interesting. The thing that's interesting about Mound is sort of it was a city unto its own. You know, when I lived in town, and I still do, but remembering that they had a kind of a self-contained city within a city. What kind of can you tell us a little bit about what that involved?
There were our own pumps for water supply, not tied into the city of Miamisburg. A power plant to make steam and electricity. Sanitary waste disposal system. Also a radioactive waste disposal system, liquid waste cleanup and disposal system. 3 different feeds from DP&L for electricity to get into the plant. We didn't make our own electricity, we did buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, if they had a major malfunction from DP&L, they'd have to generate their own power. I'm sure that with the powerhouse, that's what.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
And our own fire department.
Yeah, I remember some friends of ours that were on the fire department. They had their own workshop. They probably created a lot of their own tools since it was specialty tools.
Yes.
And then they had basically their security, and Mound was noted as being a pretty tight security area.
Yes, very much.
Anybody that worked or lived in the town that had anything to do with the Mound Lab really didn't discuss their work. It was a pretty tight-lipped operation. Because obviously because of the sensitivity of the work being done there.
That was a requirement, yes.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things when I visited your museum, an interesting feature was the discussion or the story of George Koval.
Oh, yes.
And can you talk a little bit about that? When I first went in there to see the museum, can tell us a story about Mr. Koval.
Well, George Koval was born in Sioux City, Iowa in 1913 of Russian immigrant parents. And he studied electrical engineering for 2.5 years at the University of Iowa. And then he and his parents decided to return to Russia. And George earned his degree in chemical technology in 1939 in Russia. And he married a fellow student and was drafted into the Soviet military intelligence service. And he was sent back to the U.S. in 1940 and began working for an electric company. But then he registered for the draft in 1942, and in 1944 he was sent to the Army to Oak Ridge, where he worked on the new atomic bomb, where work on the new atomic bomb was going on. He was made a health physics officer, and he had access to all the areas. And in 1945, he was sent to the Dayton Project.
And we have a picture on our screen right now. This is a group photo. I think this is Mr. Thomas is in the middle of this group photo, and we see Mr. Koval in there, but he's kind of hard to distinguish since we don't have a pointer system, but he is prominently in that group of people.
Yes, he is. Now, this is an older picture of him near the end of his life when he was back in Russia.
Okay. And then this, I think, is a picture of him in his later years with his daughter. He obviously was not in hiding, but he was in pretty frail health at this time.
Yes. He died when he was 91.
Oh, well, he lived a pretty good, long life then.
He did live a long life.
And then this picture is of Vladimir Putin. Tell us a little bit about this photograph.
Well, what he's doing here, we think, is honoring Koval. Some people say by doing that he was poking his finger in President Bush's eye. But he was honoring Koval at that time, even though Koval was not treated real well when he got back to Russia.
Yeah.
And he had to work real hard to finally get a job teaching in a university.
So, you know, the amazing thing is that we really didn't understand how much damage he had done until much, much later years.
That's correct.
He had taken some very, very sensitive material with him when he left in the 40s, and the Russians prospered from his knowledge.
Yes, the information he took back was how to make neutron initiators. So they got their bomb much sooner than they should have because of his spy work.
Yeah.
Probably 4 or 5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
So he did a lot of damage with, and he got out of town without paying the consequences.
He got out of town and we never even knew he was here.
Well, that was one super spy then that they, and they probably had many more. We do know that the Russians planted spies all over the country at that time.
Oh, there were many more.
Yeah. Well, this has been interesting, and you know, in closing, there's so much more history on the Mound Laboratory that we can cover, and unfortunately, one program is not going to do it. So let me inform our viewers that our future show installments will cover topics on explosives, detonators, tritium operations, and powering space probes. I want to thank again tonight's guests, Paul Lamburger and Ken Phipps, and encourage you to visit the Mound Science and Energy Museum located directly across the road from the historic Indian Mound in Miamisburg, Ohio. The museum is open on Tuesdays from 1 to 3 p.m. and on Saturdays from 9 to noon. Also, you can visit their website at www.moundmuseum.com. And again, gentlemen, thank you for an interesting show tonight, and we look forward to doing shows in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.